You think the megalodon was terrifying? Right. You think Leviathan Melville was the ultimate apex predator of the ocean. Also true. You think the mosasaurus ruled unchallenged and invincible? Absolutely correct. But let me tell you a terrifying fact. 470 million years ago, if their ancestors encountered this creature, they would only do one thing silently: pray that it wasn't hungry. It was the only form of life in that era that didn't need to hide from anything. What's even more thought-provoking and terrifying is, paleontologists have a hypothesis. It was precisely because this creature was so brutal that it forced early fish to evolve desperately, forcing them to develop faster speeds, stronger skeletons, and smarter brains. Later on, these fish crawled onto the land, stood up straight, learned how to use fire, invented cell phones, and started scrolling through short videos. Your intelligence right now, your skeleton and your nervous system, a part of them was forced out, bite by bite, by it. It was the most feared natural enemy of your ancestors, and also the earliest shaper of human civilization. It is called. If you think this is absurd, please listen to this sound. Does it make you feel a hint of dread? And its story is more insane than any monster movie. Let's rewind time to 470 million years ago. Note, 470 million years. Just how massive is this number? Dinosaurs only appeared 230 million years ago. Humans have only been around for a mere few million years. Yet at that time, Cameroceras was already the ruler dominating the earth. At that time, the land on earth was completely empty. No trees, no grass, not even bugs. All life, all stories, happened in the ocean. The most abundant creatures in the ocean were trilobites, small things covered entirely in hard shells, accounting for 60% of the total marine life at the time. They lived on Earth for a whopping 300 million years, making them arguably the most resilient life forms in history. But they lived their entire lives in constant fear, because there was something in the sea that gave them nightmares. That is the Cameroceras. When you first look at it, you might be taken aback, because it looks like a giant ice cream cone. A perfectly straight conical hard shell, tapering sharper toward the back, extending for nearly 6 meters long. 6 meters is the length of a mid-sized public bus. But this was just its shell. As for its head and tentacles, no one knows exactly how long they were. Scientists calculated based on the proportions of modern squid. The tentacles and head combined might be even longer than the shell. In other words, this monster in front of you could have a total length exceeding 10 meters. So how did it hunt? Here's a detail that catches many people by surprise. Cameroceras did not chase its prey. Its shell was too heavy and too long. Pursuit was simply unrealistic. The place it chose was the crevices of reefs. It would just hover there, completely motionless, its tentacles hanging loosely along the edges of the crevices, looking like a few strands of seaweed drifting with the water, carrying absolutely no presence of a hunter. The trilobite didn't know. It crawled slowly along the reef wall, looking for algae and food, doing what it did every single day. It never realized that those seaweeds had been sensing the vibrations of its every step. Closer and closer still. The next second, the tentacles wrapped around, like a dozen chains whipping out from the reef crevice, locking it in a death grip. The trilobite retracted into its shell. Useless. The hard beak of Cameroceras reached in, like industrial shears. Biting down, the hard shell shattered instantly. Its eating habits were never refined. Broken shells, severed limbs, and shredded meat scattered around the reef. And then Arandaspis appeared. This little thing, only a few centimeters long and covered in bony armor, was an existence that Cameroceras disdained to even notice. It followed behind to pick up crumbs and nibble on leftovers, living in constant fear under the shadow of the giant beast. But do you know what the most absurd part of this story is? That little thing picking up leftovers, later evolved into fish, and evolved into amphibians, evolved into reptiles, eventually evolved into mammals, and evolved into you. Speaking of this, I must mention a design by nature that I find truly mind-boggling. The outer shell of Cameroceras was not solid. Inside, it was divided into individual separate chambers. Running through these chambers was a small tube called a siphuncle. By adjusting the ratio of gas to liquid within each chamber, Cameroceras could precisely control its buoyancy and depth in the water. This was a natural, completely automated submarine ballast system, and it already existed 470 million years ago. Yet, humans building a truly practical submarine only happened at the end of the 19th century. Nature beat us to the idea by nearly 500 million years. Now, let's talk about the most brutal part. How did such a powerful creature vanish? 443 million years ago, at the end of the Ordovician period, the Earth suddenly turned hostile. The mainstream scientific explanation is that the supercontinent Gondwana drifted near the South Pole. The global climate grew drastically colder. Glaciers expanded on a massive scale, and sea levels plummeted abruptly. The warm, shallow seas where Cameroceras lived vanished. They didn't just slowly shrink. They completely disappeared. This catastrophe wiped out 85% of all marine species on Earth, known historically as the Late Ordovician mass extinction, the second most devastating mass extinction event in Earth's history. Cameroceras was caught in this disaster and vanished from the fossil record forever. But the story doesn't end there, because this next twist is the part that truly gives me goosebumps. Cameroceras died out, but two lineages of the cephalopod class, to which it belonged, managed to survive this extinction. Those two survivors later evolved into all the cephalopods in the oceans today: nautiluses, cuttlefish, octopuses, and squid. Yes, the very squid you eat at a barbecue. Its ancestors were once, 470 million years ago, the most terrifying existence on this planet. Now, you dip it in sauce and eat it. With the descendants of the fallen reduced to this, one hardly knows whether to call it the cruelty of evolution or the prowess of humanity. There is one final detail that many people don't know, but I think it's the most awe-inspiring part of the Cameroceras story. Paleontologists have a hypothesis that the existence of giant apex predators like Cameroceras may have inadvertently rewritten the entire evolutionary fate of vertebrates. During the Ordovician period, the ancestors of fish were still incredibly fragile. They had primitive skeletons, slow speeds, and poor perception. Faced with Cameroceras, they had only one option: adapt or die. And so, the pressure of predation literally forced early fish to develop lighter skeletons, more advanced muscles, and more sensitive nervous systems. Later on, the descendants of these fish crawled onto land, and after a very, very long time, stood up straight, learned to use fire, built submarines, and began studying that monster that lived in the sea 470 million years ago. While Cameroceras was devouring our ancestors, it was also, bite by bite, forcing us to become what we are today. It was our natural enemy. So you see, extinction is never the end. Cameroceras has been gone for 400 million years, yet its genes are still swimming on your dinner skewers tonight, and the terror it inflicted is still etched into your very bones. A species takes its final bow after tens of millions of years of dominance, shuffling the deck for the entire ocean in return. The disappearance of the strong is never the true conclusion of a story, but rather where other lives truly begin. The fact that you can think and feel today and marvel at a piece of fossil is not because your ancestors were lucky enough. It's because they were afraid enough. You are the answer that endured. The land you are standing on right now was a desert 250 million years ago. The oxygen concentration was only half of what it is now, leaving you breathless after just a few steps. The sky was a reddish orange, and the earth was essentially scorched. Right in a place like this, a certain animal accomplished something in Earth's history. The most important evolutionary leap was not whales returning to the ocean, nor birds taking to the skies, but a single leg shifting its position. This single modification rewrote the entire history of the Earth 231 million years ago. In a wasteland of what is now Argentina, a certain animal scurried across the ground. It was less than 1.5 meters long and weighed roughly 10 kilograms. With slender legs and a small head, it ran around like an oversized turkey. This was one of the earliest known dinosaurs, Eoraptor. It was no apex predator. It didn't even rank in the middle of the food chain. It fed on lizards, small reptiles, and plants, sometimes even competing with other animals for carrion. Who were the actual rulers of the land during this period? They were creatures known as Rausuchians. Exceeding 6 meters in length, they were 30 times the weight of Eoraptor. They had thick, powerful limbs and a terrifying bite force. Whenever Eoraptor crossed paths with one, it would run as far away as possible. So now you know the kind of situation dinosaurs faced when they first appeared. They were the underdogs, complete and utter underdogs. Let's roll the clock back a little further. 252 million years ago, the most devastating mass extinction in history struck the Earth, the Permian mass extinction. It wiped out about 96% of marine species, and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate genera completely vanished. Scientists call it the Great Dying. Did not step into a world of new opportunities, but rather onto a scorched wasteland. What was the Earth like back then? All the continents were joined together, forming the supercontinent Pangaea. The inland regions were so incredibly far from the oceans that rainfall simply could not penetrate them. Peak surface temperatures exceeded 60 degrees Celsius, and atmospheric oxygen levels plummeted to just 10% to 15%, leaving creatures gasping after just a few paces. Volcanoes erupted everywhere. The sky turned a reddish orange, and vast stretches of land became deserts. Right in a place like this, life began its long, grueling reconstruction. The first to recover and bounce back was an animal called Lystrosaurus. It looked like a cross between a pig and a hippopotamus, equipped with a pair of downward curving tusks. They weren't picky eaters and would consume anything, even burrowing underground to escape the extreme heat. At one point, they accounted for 75% of all land vertebrates. Throughout the entire early Triassic period, practically everything running across the ground was a Lystrosaurus. But Lystrosaurus's golden age did not last very long. New apex predators emerged. The main players were a group of reptiles called pseudosuchians, often referred to as false crocodiles. Note that these were not actual crocodiles. They were merely distant relatives of modern crocodiles. However, they looked even more crocodilian than crocodiles, and were far more formidable fighters. The fiercest among them were members of the Rauisuchidae family. Reaching lengths of 6 to 9 meters, they had thick, powerful limbs. Unlike modern crocodiles that crawl flat on their bellies, they ran with an almost fully upright posture. In that era, they were at the very top of the terrestrial world. No creature dared to provoke them. Meanwhile, the Eoraptors were cowering in the corners, relying on their small size and quick speed to scrape by and survive. About 20 million years passed this way, and no one could have anticipated that the tables would turn. Have you ever carefully watched a modern crocodile walk? Their limbs splay out to the sides, and their bellies are nearly dragging on the ground. With every step they take, their entire body sways from side to side. Breathing and locomotion interfere with each other, meaning they must stop to catch their breath after just a few strides. Now, the apex predator of that time, the Rauisuchians, had already evolved their legs directly beneath their bodies, solving the problem of locomotive efficiency. However, they still hadn't broken past their respiratory limitations. Dinosaurs were different. Not only did dinosaurs have legs positioned directly underneath their bodies for upright support, but they had also evolved an air sac system extending throughout their entire body. This was the prototype of the double respiration system later seen in birds. This meant that when they were running, their breathing was completely unimpeded by body swaying. Taking a single breath could yield twice the amount of oxygen. Eating the exact same meal, they could run further and pursue longer, while consuming far less energy. In the low oxygen, scarcity-plagued doomsday environment of the Triassic, this was the true defining edge between life and death. Furthermore, walking upright liberated their forelimbs, and highly efficient respiration laid the foundation for high-energy flight. Later on, dromaeosaurs could hunt down prey with sickle claws, and eventually, birds would be able to fly into the sky. This logical chain had its seeds planted right at this step in the Triassic. Yet, even with this advantage, dinosaurs were still no match for the Pseudotsuchians, until nature itself intervened. 201 million years ago, the supercontinent Pangaea began to rip apart. The continental rifting did not happen overnight, but alongside this fracturing, supervolcanoes began erupting on a massive scale. The area covered exceeded 11 million square kilometers, with continuous eruptions lasting for about 600,000 years. This is the famously known event in geological history, the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, CAMP, event. The consequence was a staggering surge in carbon dioxide concentrations. Global warming, ocean acidification, and widespread die-offs of vegetation followed. The food chain began to collapse from its very bottom. The Triassic-Jurassic mass extinction wiped out 76% of all species on Earth. The Rauisuchians went extinct, and the apex predators among the Pseudotsuchians were virtually wiped out entirely. The colossal beast that once held dominion over the dinosaurs completely vanished. Yet the dinosaurs survived. Why did the dinosaurs manage to survive? It was no fluke. Scientific research has revealed several key reasons why dinosaurs endured this extinction. First, large numbers of dinosaurs were distributed in high-latitude regions, far away from the extreme heat zones of the equator. Fossil evidence shows that as early as the Triassic, early dinosaurs had already spread into cold, high-latitude areas, and evolved features adapted to low temperatures, meaning they were not restricted to surviving solely in tropical environments. Second, early dinosaurs may have already grown primitive filamentous insulation structures on their bodies, essentially precursors to feathers. The volcanic winter brought on by the volcanic eruptions caused temperatures to plummet, and this layer of insulation allowed them to pull through the sudden freeze. Third, the extreme adaptability of their diet and digestive systems. The diets of early dinosaurs were highly generalized, consisting mostly of omnivorous groups. They could adapt to the barren food resources left in the wake of the catastrophe. Whether it was the ferns that recovered quickly after the disaster, gymnosperms, or the carrion of small animals, they could make use of it all. Any edible resource that could be found during the doomsday, they were able to digest. When a crisis strikes, the first to fall are always those powerful entities overly specialized for a specific environment. Dinosaurs, on the other hand, were the kind of creatures that could make do with anything and managed to live in any environment. Once their competitors were completely wiped clean, the ecological niches of the entire planet suddenly became vacant. The positions for large herbivores were left wide open, and the spots for apex predators lay empty. In wetlands, in forests, out in the open ranges, opportunities were everywhere. Dinosaurs entered a phase of explosive expansion. Their body sizes grew larger and larger, and their diversity grew richer and richer, marching toward a reign that would last for the next 135 million years. This was the opening chapter of the Jurassic and the Cretaceous. Every time I look into this piece of history, it brings one thing to my mind. Throughout the first 20 million years since their origin, dinosaurs were always the underdogs. They were suppressed and chased around, scraping by while hiding away in the corners. But they did not perish under that oppression. Instead, They sharpened themselves into a blade through it. By the time that catastrophe cleared out all the dominant powers, they were fully prepared. The 4.6 billion years of Earth's history repeatedly tells us the exact same truth. The one that is truly formidable is never the one that happens to be the strongest right now, but the one that during the absolute hardest times never stops evolving. Eras will shift, and the strong will fall, but those life forms that keep building up their strength in the shadows will ultimately see an era that belongs to them. In the next episode, we will enter the true golden age of the Jurassic dinosaurs.